So thank you for joining us for another of the programs. So in each of you we've met before, which is lovely. And this is a separate one to the one that we were running with you last week in terms of it's focusing specifically last week on literacy and numeracy, and then employability skills. And now we're talking about the concept of non-formal assessment tools. So we're interested to have a conversation and an unpacking of what each of our concepts are around non-formal assessment, or maybe some of the other terms you might use for that concept. And then what kind of design or what sort of resource or activities do you need to support that process of helping learners understand that they are learning, they're constantly learning. They're certainly formalizing some of that learning in the courses that they're participating with you. And then, how do they recognize when they're actually making some progress through that learning? So like the other two programs, these will go over 3 sessions. And so I'll just give you a moment to read through what the aim of the aims of the program are. So it's a crossover of the instructional design, of the educational design, the graphic design, the visual and aspects of designing the resources, and then how does that apply to making sure that the information that you're gathering is current, authentic and reusable. I don't think I'll need to go into too much detail. In terms of who we are. Michael, do you want to add any more? So maybe I'll just, sorry, I always do that, ask somebody a question, then keep it all of me. Maybe I'll just have a quick think about where my assessment, the non-formal assessment. So obviously our role is to build on people's existing experiences and skills and helping them learn. I have a real passion around trying to help people learn how to learn. So recognizing that they are learning, and then how might they evidence that? So that I do a lot of assessing, formal assessing, which we'll talk a little bit about within the vocational education and training sector. I'm actually a credential assessor, and I also assess postgrad professional association students. So I do a lot of the assessing part of it, but the process of helping people learn how to monitor, well, first of all, set their own goals, and then monitor if they're achieving those goals, and then collecting evidence to demonstrate they've achieved those goals, something that I'm quite passionate about. Michael, do you want to give maybe an assessment context or non-formal assessment context for this training?
Yeah, I guess all education that I've sort of been involved with is some form of assessment. Just sort of depends on how credentialized it is. I kind of always remember in my kind of learn local days that one of the big assessments for students that I was involved in terms of like formal assessment was people getting their road rules, getting their license, their learner's permit, because, a lot of what we did was really just to kind of check that they were learning and help take the next step or come backwards or go forward. But if we had a road rules class, and it was quite popular. And so that was kind of one of those few areas where people could achieve something outside of us and their families and society. So it was like a kind of, benchmark of successful participation in society. So that was kind of a really stressful form of assessment, and sort of transitioning them from playing around with questions in class and having a laugh and playing with the cars on the big tracks we used to have, and brainstorming, rules, to actually sitting there and going back. There used to be a guy or a woman that would ask the students the questions, and then eventually they went to a computer, and it was quite good because, I used to be able to say, can I sit in as a support person? And so I learned all the questions after about 3 or 4 students. And so we had this really good question bank. And then when they went to the automatic system, it became a bit more difficult. But so, I think, like that was my kind of main assessment. We had a couple of people who did things like CTA too. And, they still have to meet those benchmarks there, but there's a little bit more. We have a little more control over how we negotiate them with students than say in VET, where we've got a curriculum, you kind of have to do it. There might be some negotiation. I can remember in VET in schools having negotiations with kids about their group task and, aligning and changing. But, generally sort of found that was a bit of a difference. And then, of course, I've been involved in assessment writing and VET and assessing students and, writing learning content based on what people have got in assessment. So it kind of does pepper through the whole sector, but I think it is quite unique in Learn Local.
So maybe we normally have that, where do you work, where do you come from, and so on. Maybe I'm just going to flip it to you guys. Not you're first on my list there. The same. What's your kind of understanding or experience around the non-formal, assessment process or tools?
Well, there's a few things that I use. So I use self-reflection surveys and checklists so they can work out themselves whether they feel, confident or still need some instruction, etc. I use a KWL chart quite a bit, so what they know, what they want to know, and what they've learned. And I found, so I was teaching some, most of them were probably in their 50s and 60s. They needed to learn computing for sort of retraining. They'd never used computers in their jobs before, but they were going into work where they're more likely to use it. So a lot of them went, oh, I know nothing. And then using that and then getting them to reflect on what they'd actually learn each time really helped them see that they had actually learned things, and it wasn't all sort of overwhelming and things like that. So I found that was a good exercise. Something else I've used, especially with seniors, like learning digital skills, is I've used like a bingo chart. So it could be, I can log into MyGov, or I can send an email, or I can add an attachment, and then we use that, and they sort of have a go at some of the activities that we've been covering and see how confident they are. I find Kahoots are a really popular way. We always do a Kahoot on the last session of whatever I'm teaching, because it gets them really excited and really fired up that they know some of the answers, and they like working in pairs or whatever to answer the questions. And so those are sort of the non-formal ways, I suppose, I've assessed learning. I'm doing my training as assessment at the moment, and I've got an assessment cluster coming up, so I'm going to be learning about formal assessment as well in VET. But so those are some of the things I've done so far.
Fantastic. And so you're saying the people, the 50 to 60-year-olds get excited with Kahoot? Is that the same cohort?
Yeah. So yeah, they do. I've also got a SLES group. So they're school leavers. They love it too. I think probably, I don't think I've used it with a group that hasn't got engaged and excited about it. So I've used it with cold women, sort of in their mainly their 30s and 40s, sort of reskilling for, they've raised their family and they want to start some work. So, so thinking about it, I've used it with a lot of different cohorts, and they all get really engaged in it. So
fantastic. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Bruce, do you want to share what your either your non-formal experience or what your concept of non-formal assessment is?
It varies depending on the students that you have. One method that I found that's kind of similar to Lottie is like a game. And one game that I found that in another way of assessing their knowledge is I use trivia. I use a trivia, so like a Jeopardy type of way as well, where they do points, and you can do that online or face to face. And I find that when they do it in teams, they work better in teams when they can come up with the answers. So I find that your Jeopardy trivia was probably the most successful ones that I've done, where they when they're in teams or when they get points and they get a little prize like a little chocolate bar or something like that. And I found that way of assessment, that way of non-formal assessment is quite effective
Mm.
in getting that response because they get something out of it. It could be a chocolate bar, something like that. Yeah.
So I love it that it's groups and it's building on that kind of like play as learning. We were talking just previously around, often when we send kids into the formal education in their preschool or kindergarten years, it's all about play, and it's learning by play. And then as they get closer and closer to the pointy end of year 12, then they make it really academic and boring. I shouldn't say that. Maybe some people find. But I think also what it made me think of was perhaps it's less threatening. Like you're not using that word assessment.
Yeah. It's basically them having fun, and the way that I do my form of teaching or doing any form of assessment is I like to have a lot of fun. When there's laughter, there's, as you said, there's less stress. It's not as formal. What I've also found is that when people have fun, they tend to retain information easier. They retain the information for longer periods as well, and they can that short-term memory, long-term memory. They can recall that information again.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's getting it from that short term into the long term, and what's the trigger? And it sounds like perhaps it's the engagement of it, and feeling good about actually achieving something without feeling kind of terrified while you're doing that.
Hey Bruce, I've got a question for you. Is thinking about your participants, is fun something that they would have come to you associating with their prior education, do you think?
No, most of them when they come, they look at me and they go, "Oh, this is going to be another form of standard training." And then once I add a bit of fun to it and a bit of humor, they open up and they become more relaxed. So it's not something that I promote. I just it's basically what it's just the way that I am. I like to have fun regardless of whether it be at home or with family, friends, or at work. I like to have fun. I like to add a bit of humor. Obviously, there's a time and place for it. However, I always like to have fun no matter what, because you only live your life once, and if you smile, it makes everyone's life much easier. That's how I see things.
Yeah, that's good philosophy. Hello, Ali.
Hello, Ali.
Hello, how are we?
Good. Happy to have trouble today. Hope you got it okay.
Yeah, I managed to get okay now. It's all good now. Thank you.
Awesome.
So technology, sometimes our friend. Lottie, we've been having a conversation with Lottie before. Sometimes our friend, and often it's. I often talk about praying to the technology gods and hoping things will work well. But Ali, just settle in. We've just, as I said, we've had nearly everybody but Paul and yourself around. What's our experience or understanding around non-formal assessment in programs? So, Paul, can I throw to you, and maybe anything in terms of some of those projects that you're working on as well?
Yeah, I guess because Skills for Work and Study is at the front of my mind at the moment, I keep on linking everything back to that and to the project in developing the resources last year. And it's that thing where we had a community of practice. We had about 4 different providers, and it was just great to share experiences and whatnot. And there were a few people, because the brief that we had was that we had to pitch the activities at ACSF 1. Not entry level, not exit level. Bang in the middle. I don't know how to sugarcoat this, but I think
Do you want me to pause the recording?
no. Certainly no names, no pack drill, Mick. But
All right.
But there were some who were challenged because of their previous experiences with compliance.
I think you made it more difficult for you having a compliance background.
Yeah, and I mean, I had the advantage of being involved with pre-accredited delivery for many years. familiar with the PQF and everything, but there were others who they accredited delivery was all that they knew, and it really took a long time for not everyone, but for some people to get their head around the idea of we're not talking about compliance.
Mm.
We're talking about teaching.
Like I can talk from my own experience around that, having been in vet sector for a long time and having to be part of an ASQA audit and been found non-compliant and do all the fun bits that all wrap around that, and then be an assessor in another format. And I think it probably took me about 6 to 8 months to be able to just let go that you don't have to be so pedantic as you do in the vet sector, as Lottie's going to find out when she starts those assess units. So yeah, okay. So there was some learning, it sounds like learning for you about how do you bring your colleagues across into the non-accredited space, the pre-accredited space, and also for your colleagues to understand what it means to be able to have some freedom.
How did you unpack it for them, Paul?
Sorry?
How did you unpack that for them?
Well, it was a process. You know, it wasn't like an overnight type of thing. First thing I would say is that I could understand and empathize completely, you know. And yeah, it was that whole, how can I best put this? Just that liberating feeling of just teaching and you know, and it's that thing with one of the things that I love about pre-accredited delivery is that, you know, you can plan, but the very first thing, you know, and you know, you put together your session planner and everything, but the very first thing that you ask your learners in the first session is, what do you want to learn? And that influences how you deliver the program. And a lot of stuff might have to go out of the window, you know, but and so you can't be kind of too hung up on it. I mean, skills for work and study is a different type of thing, particularly at the moment because we're piloting the resources, and the learners get that completely. You know, this is what we're dealing with. You know, but even at the pilot stage, we are hearing stories in the moderation sessions about how the resources are taken in all sorts of different directions because of the needs of the learners, you know.
It's interesting you say that, because that part of this program is for that very reason, is to be able to say, you know, we understand these resources, and here's an opportunity for you to contextualize those resources, but do it in a way that you still keep the quality that they're in. So that's what the program, these programs are designed to help build those skills around that.
Yeah, and it's you know, it's to do with adult education, respecting people's strengths, respecting their backgrounds, respecting their needs, you know, and you know, Mick was touching on before about the learners permit program. We for building and construction, as a little bit of a carrot to dangle at the beginning, we said to the learners, okay, through our Jobs Victoria program, if you stick with us through the whole course, we'll pay for your white card training. And all of those who enrolled in the white card training, all of them got their white cards. And so we were able to, you know, we were able to demonstrate that this course, well, it can deliver on what it promises to deliver. And I wanted to do the same thing with maybe Bruce's Chocolates. That sounds pretty good as well. But I wanted to do a similar thing with food processing and offer food handling training at the end of the course. And then we had Elisa from Fresh Select, one of the farms here in Werribee, Werribee South, and she presented, and she said, we're now having an intake for packers, so please apply. So this whole idea about food handling training, that went right out the window. You know, it was getting the resumes ready and getting prepared for jobs.
She had a bigger carrot. She had a bigger carrot. Well, literally, she may literally have had a bigger carrot.
Absolutely, yeah. So my first delivery, I finished that on the 1st of September, and so some of those guys, they applied for. Yeah, so 3 of them have now got jobs at Fresh Select, and there was a fourth one who was offered a job, and she thought she wasn't ready now, because this job opportunity, it kind of sprang out of the blue.
But those examples you've provided are also indicators, are non-formal indicators, assessment indicators, aren't they? So the program, the objectives of the program is to prepare their pre-employment type training programs to prepare them to take that next step. And so what you've described is, well, that's evidence. Yeah, that's evidence of them actually achieving some of the program outcomes, even though they might not be written in that kind of way.
Yeah, and it's learning, and it's also confidence.
Absolutely.
And you know, I've been involved in the adult literacy space for many years, and there's somebody, you know, you can kind of tell that they're, you know, you're doing their PTA, and I remember one particular guy who was saying, "Oh, I'm incapable of learning," you know, and which I kind of knew wasn't true, but his confidence was shot to pieces, and he, you know, so he joined my literacy class, and it became very apparent that his reading ability was far above everybody else's.
Okay, there you go.
So it's that sort of there's kind of a nagging thing amongst many people, particularly when you first come across them. It's kind of like, is this confidence or is this ability?
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah. So yeah, confidence is a major factor as well.
So that's that relationship building. But I might just move on at this stage.
Of course. Yeah.
Ali, your experience with or understanding of the non-formal assessment.
Right. Alison, I have been working for many years in the pre-accredited space. So, and which I know for good reasons, it doesn't focus on assessment. And the A-frame, PQF, Paul, which you just mentioned, I am well versed with that and all that. So there is not heavily focused on that as well. But I think so recently, a few of the reports that we're writing and, you know, a few of the grants and whatnot, what we have found is to have, to actually document it and also to, we as a trainer, I have been doing it, but it is just build that understanding, awareness around it. So I mean, the biggest thing that we have been able to do is it is around actually those employability skills, those soft skills, and you know, confidence and those very intangible progress, which is very hard to define, Alison. I'm not expert in this area, and seriously, I'm lost for even the words and ideas. It's only when I sit with someone and discuss through the thoughts come to my mind. Paul, what you were just saying there before, everything was resonating. Yes, this is what we're doing and all that. But I think so. It is just the training vocabulary around that space, Alison. So I'm craving for that discussion and that that my knowledge gap in that area.
It sounds like you're in the right place. So I think that is what we need to do is unpack it, because I don't think there's going to be one definition or one example, and perhaps by the end of it, all of us can come away with what's important for us. I think we do it. Well, I know we do it. Right? Whenever even what we're doing now, I'm making an assessment as to, are we on the right track right now? Are we, because I've gone right off track from the PowerPoint slides, but I thought it was appropriate at that time to do that. And you're basing it on, because I help people think about, I asked trainers, well, what kind of feedback are you going to get? And they're all looking for formal feedback. They're always looking for either somebody telling them something, or somebody's going to write something down. Their student's going to do, a survey or a questionnaire, or, they're going to give them verbal feedback. And I'm like, but you also just watching what they do gives you feedback. It tells you whether or not you think you're on track or whether you're not on track. And I usually give them the example of, one time I used to teach double entry accounting, and it's quite abstract. And one time I thought it'd be really clever if I used the red pen to indicate the movement of everything. And then I sent them home to do some of the work on that, and they all came back with red pen marks all over their work, which is not something they should have. And so it was really good feedback for me then and there to go, that was not a good teaching practice. Or I had to be very explicit about the teaching practice. So it gave me feedback as to whether I was on track and they were on track. All right. So I'm going to, Michael, I was going
to say something that I thought when people were talking, particularly what Ali was saying there, that it seems to me that what you've all kind of said is that because we're quite sort of reactive and intuitive when we're working with students, that it's sometimes really hard to bottle what that formula is to work with people. So, we can talk about examples, but it's a little bit harder to talk about what's the processes we go through in our heads, isn't it? To how we work with a particular individual and step through all those things that you talked about and honor them in your kind of dealings with that person.
And just quickly, I'll add one comment is when I'm because I teach some learners having some disability as well, so that actually adds another layer of little complexity as well. So if you want to, Alison, maybe address that little part as well.
Yeah, so that's right, and so it's individualized maybe too. So when we're looking for indicators of progress or monitoring their learning gain, it's at an individual level, not necessarily at a group. But Michael, I'm going to skip all of these because you guys know all of this. We've done all of that. We've done that in a little kind of different form.
Yeah.
So, but we might have already started to touch on this. So, Michael, what do you think? We continue.
Yeah, I think we've kind of almost dealt with that one, haven't we, in a sense? Because this was the discussion we've had has kind of, in a sense, addressed some of this. And I think this is what Paul was kind of talking about, because we know that kind of assessments everywhere in vocational training and K-12 and higher education, but in local, we're not using the terms monitoring. We're focusing on strength, progress, and identity. So I get a sense that you have a fairly strong sense about the differences between those two from your introductory remarks. Would that be fair case? Go on, sorry.
Sorry. Going back to what Lottie was saying before about the reflective exercises, and they're a massive part of the skills. All of the skills for work and study resources, and it's part of the PQF as well. I think there's one element in the PQF where it states that the teacher and the learner should be involved in reflective practice, you know, and so the KWL exercise, that's one that we have in the food processing, and also exit slips, which is where the learners write something that, what's one thing that you learned today? What's the most important thing you learned today? They write it on a Post-it note and they put it up on the wall, or they put it up on the whiteboard. And of course, if you're online, you use Jamboard or Padlet or something.
That's really interesting. I've done that exercise too with vet trainers, and because I've been running some programs with them over a kind of prolonged period. And so I usually start, I try with a bit of brainstorm, you know, what did you learn about education? What did you learn about training and assessment this week? You know, which could be a student interaction or PD interaction or interaction with a supervisor or a client. And it's kind of, it's not something that's native to, or so it's not something that's kind of fundamental to what we do as teachers to reflect on that kind of work. So what kind of framework, if you're thinking about educators monitoring themselves, what's the kind of framework you give them? Because it's almost like a miniature what you're expecting students to do.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm a bit tempted to go on a real philosophical tangent here, which is a bit of a worry. But it's that whole thing about you know, rhetorical speech, and how in Australian society you don't say to your partner or your friends or family or whatever, hey, you're fantastic and this is why. And because we're not used to it, we if somebody's paying us such a direct compliment, we might be confronted about it, you know. But it's just that sort of observation that can really influence. You know, it's like, for example, I was an emergent, you know, CRT for another Learn Local. Just their CEGA teacher was on leave, so I filled in for a few weeks. And one of the ladies, she said that she was interested in childcare, and they had a childcare facility at the Learn Local, and I said, well, why don't you volunteer? He said, oh, I can't do that. So of course you can do that. You know, it's the beauty of volunteering. And then why don't you go and study? You know, and she's saying, oh, my reading and writing's not good enough. And I think I didn't harp on about it, but what happened is that I sowed the seed, and then I went there, I don't know, about 5 years later, and she did her course. She got a job at the childcare facility, and she ended up being the manager.
That's fantastic.
So,
but I'm thinking more like I just really trying to pick up on your comment earlier about, and I think it's a really fundamental question, that we're talking about individual monitoring and self-reflection, and that we don't do enough self-reflection as facilitators. And I'm wondering what that process might look like in terms of monitoring ourselves, so that it helps how we might monitor our students. What are the sorts of things and questions we might address to ourselves that get us reflecting on how we've performed that day, how we've dealt with individuals, you know, the kinds of things that go through your head after a class where you think, oh, did I miss something there? Or, you know, what is there a framework that we can bottle to kind of do that self-reflection? because we're expecting our learners to do it, but is there a step first with ourselves that we need to kind of formalize a little bit?
And Nick, it is the frame. Sorry,
No, you go.
it is the framework around assessment, yeah, around tracking the progress.
Oh, it could be about assessment. It could also be about, like teaching and learning too. There's all, yeah. How do we improve ourselves with in a way that will improve the students? I guess. What's
So
that framework look like?
I was going to say, ask Lottie. Lottie, you use this self-reflective practice for your students. Is that a good framework for yourself, or do you do it subconsciously and you don't really realize you're doing something?
Well, I realize I'm doing it, but I haven't got anything formal. So if I have a student and I realize by questions they were asking that they haven't grasped something or something like that, I will put it in the framework where it says, what adjustments might be needed to the course. I write it there. That's the only formal thing I do. But I often make notes, and then the next time I deliver the course, I go back and look at those notes and I go, okay, so I need to add more visuals to this, or I need to explain this in a different way, or I need to have a different activity. One example was I was teaching computers to seniors, and I hadn't really taught them how to use a mouse the first time that I did it. And we ended up using, for all 4 sessions, we ended up doing mouse work. So the next time I did it, I actually implemented a mouse activity right at the beginning to check and to also teach them how to use the mouse and things like that. So so I do make notes, and then I go back and refer to them next time I deliver the course. So
that's great.
And
Sometimes, yeah,
and sometimes I adjust the course as well. So I have some students that I realized wasn't grasping a particular concept. So the next session, I will actually recap and do a little activity relating to that concept they didn't understand the previous week. So,
that's great.
as Paul was saying, I think that's the beauty of pre-credited learning. You can adjust as you go.
And that would be something that probably be common to both assessment methods. I think that kind of reflection on improvement. But it's kind of interesting that I'm just thinking that, what Ali mentioned about it really depends on the individual and the student. It's really hard to kind of write it down. It's an intuitive thing that we have.
Yeah, sometimes it is, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a little bit separate from the classroom, but kind of integrated with it as well. I remember a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, I organised a picnic for Social Inclusion Week, and we invited all the students, and I wanted the students to take as much ownership as possible, and I went to each of the classes and I said, you need to organise an activity. Just you, the students. Your teacher doesn't organise it, you organise it, And of course the teacher had to help out the lower levels. But it was interesting because the whole idea was to make that occasion as informal as possible, but it seemed as though the learners needed permission for everything. It was like, can we walk by the river? Can we sit in this area? Can I sit with my group of friends?
That's amazing.
And that was just fascinating. Just that whole thing about how, and I guess what I'm getting to here is to, as a teacher, you need to constantly test your own assumptions about what your learners are capable of and what you're actually there to do. And if you have that, I think you're on a really good thing. if you have that level of awareness where you're testing your assumptions constantly.
Yeah, and putting
Yeah.
decisions back to them as much as often and frequent as you can. It's
And
interesting you say that, because I remember when COVID started, Alice and I were working with a group of TAFE teachers who deliver the language literacy classes. So they're a bit separate from the rest of the TAFE. And so our conversations, it was about e-assessment, and our conversations were that in our first session, which was live, face-to-face, was our students wouldn't be able to handle it. They couldn't get online, they wouldn't be able to interact online, they wouldn't be able to communicate online. Then COVID hit, and then when I got back to them and get together, they were then scrambling for ideas for what would work. And we revisited that question about, how did your assumptions limit your expectation of the students? And they said, absolutely, because they ended up getting 80% of those students online. Others chose to not continue. And that, to me, that was a really good, concrete example. But yeah, like you say, it can happen all the time. Kind of, they can continually get. We've got to continually question our assumptions, which is it's hard to put a framework in that, isn't it? It's very much about us as individuals in a sense, and the kinds of questions that go through around here.
Mike, I will just bring in a few comments. Really, there's no particular framework, but when I now think about it, it is those things that you, as a teacher, I would have picked up along the way. So things like asking for the previous learning experience or working experience. So what happens is, as adult learners, they would be in their mid-40s, mid-50s, and it would have been a long gap, when they would have had their formal education. And then I would ask it, how did it go? Okay, when was it? How was it? How you felt? And I think so, Paul, it's a good point. And I feel, unfortunately, and that's very heart-wrenching as well, the level of confidence when it comes around learning. So I think so when you are sitting in that chair, in that place that you're feeling quite fragile and exposed, and that fear of judgment, fear of failure, all that kicks in, and few other adults in the room, and stuff. So I think so, bringing awareness and bringing your unconscious bias, as you're saying, your assumptions and how you're conducting, that is very important as well. And also the other point is bringing awareness around their progress and their little achievement, actually celebrating those sort of thing. Even by the end of the class, my always question is, and I don't know from where I picked it up, is I can share one little thing that you have learned today, and also if you want to explain this a bit and stuff. And I think so it did got said in the session before as well, but I think so you could feel it's so real feeling that you can see the shine in their eyes, and stuff like that. So that's really good as well, and I think so that gives you a bit of indication around their progress as well. And also I think so strength-based approach as well. So once and I have seen also once they are achieving stuff in their learning space, they're saying, yes, I'm learning so much and whatnot. I have felt their confidence in their other aspects of life has also increased as well. Yeah, but it's hard to quantify and hard to name it.
It really depends, because you could do it one class and not repeat itself in the next. And that self-reflection thing reminded me of the old things used to do sometimes. You get people to write a little letter to themselves and they start the course and what they want to do, what they want to get out of, what they want to learn, as Paul said, and then you take that, put it away, and then bring it out at the end of the class and say, well, do you recognize that person still, or do you recognize what you kind of said there? And it's they've documented their change, to where they've kind of got to. Well, that's a really interesting discussion. Thanks, guys. I probably should hand back to Alison. We've got another slide here which just kind of outlines the difference between the two. Vet assessment has got quite a bit in that. A lot of assessment that I've done, I've taken phone calls from students, regularly, wanting that reflection, wanting that discussion about how could I apply this, how could I do it. I think But it's probably not like it's not kind of a bolted on assumption of what happens in, say, learn local and pre-credit stuff. So, it can be very diagnostic, or it's much more about at that end, trying to see if they're getting to the end and then adjusting yourself. I think this one kind of is a bit common, that, if you can get that reflection or even assessment task along the way, or little activities, it does help you maybe reflect and, increase the complexity of what it is that you're doing if it's too easy, or adjust the examples that you use, or the kind of metaphors we try to weave stories around what we're trying to teach. You've all talked about reflective monitoring. I think that's a big part of all education. But I think what's different here, this is probably the main one, is, kind of the celebration that you've all mentioned, and thinking about how far the student has travelled is really central. By the end of the day in VET, it's really about, are you competent or not? Have you satisfactorily achieved the task or not? And so with us, I think it's much more about, well, you might not have satisfactorily achieved the task, but boy, you made some real kind of steps in terms of your confidence, your ability, your resilience, all those kinds of things. So thanks for that discussion. That was really quite enlightening. I'm going to hand over to Alison now. Oh no, I got another one. So look, this is a bit of a philosophical question for you to think about, because a lot of our work is around transition to some form of employment project or preparation or employability. So on the one hand, we might be preparing learners for the world of work or the world of further education to get access to the work. As kind of Paul seems to be in that really sweet spot straddling those two things. So is there a bit of a tension there in our work? We've got our eye on the strength-based model when we're working with students, but if we're going to transition them out, there's another form of education that we might have to kind of get them used to as a sort of a transition. So if you're working in that employability space, do you see that as a bit of a tension?
I would certainly say yes, a big yes.
And what do you see that tension mainly being, and how do you deal with it, Ali?
One of the learners, they moved on, and they did Cert 3 or 4 in aged care. And what happened is, and they did intro to aged care, and of course, with our pre-accredited, there was no assessment. But as soon as you put the word assessment and exams and stuff, it just has got a very different connotation to it, and it felt like almost a skill to understand what assessment is like in in the vocational or the accredited space. So there was a bit of learning and bit of confidence building in that space there as well. So I'm not sure if I'm really off the track here.
No, I think you're right. I mean, it's kind of like you're moving from the individual being central to the knowledge being central, aren't you? So it's the individual can get left behind a little bit because, the level of importance has started to shift a little bit. So I think you're right on the money.
And I think so if you dig a little bit deeper, it comes down to the flexibility which pre-accredited training offers. Really, it is that flexibility around not, by the end of the day, reach a certain outcome. So they can have different ways how to get to it, and even, a little flexibility on the outcomes. But with the accredited space, it is very rigid. They have to be there. And I think so a lot of creativity needs to be involved around how a trainer takes a learner from point A to B, and just minimize that, I don't know, the challenges or the negativity around assessment as well.
Yeah, so something like a briefing of some kind, isn't it? That's a great point.
Just quickly on that, the tension within work between an accredited and pre-accredited is that with an accredited, what I've found is that everything's all molded already, everything's all structured. So there's less tension and work and what you need to do to build that. Was a non-accredited or pre-accredited, it's so vast. It's not accredited, and you have to build that material to ensure that you're not doing a form of plagiarism, and you're not giving misinformation to the participants as well, not adding your own views. Accredited, everything's all there, everything's all based, everything's all been research already done for you. Was non-accredited and pre-accredited, there's that danger and there's that tension or that anxiety there where you're like, oh, am I saying the right things? Am I giving misinformation to these students or not? And that's what some of the trainers that I found that have put their own views. When you're training, you should be adding your own views. It should be knowledge based so that it is unbiased no matter what.
That's interesting. So do you think that's an experience thing or?
Oh, partly, yes, partly, not all, but partly, and what I've seen with other trainers, especially with your non-accredited and pre-accredited, because, for example, I will be teaching a course and then a participant go, look, Bruce, what about this one here? Can we learn that next week? With non-accredited and pre-accredited, you do have the option of maybe adding to it if you wish. Was accredited, it's rigid, it's stuck there. You can add to it, but it's not a formal form of information that you can technically add into that component.
Yeah, so what I think sometimes what you're saying is that you can perhaps have too much freedom, and
Yeah,
you've still got your learning objectives and your objectives of the program, but you've got to be kind of mindful how far you stray from them to satisfy yourself, perhaps that you're meeting students' express needs. That's a really good point. Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I reckon that's a good discussion, Charles. We can move on. Now, one of the models we've got for this particular program is that, and some of you have been involved in the other programs, and we've kind of had a generic way of approaching those because they're both sort of language literacy and employability. With this area, we thought it'd be good to maybe, because there's so much experience in this area and people that we've enrolled, that over the course of the 3 weeks with you, we'd start to build a bit of a checklist of instructional design considerations for monitoring learners. And I'm not quite sure that instructional design goes with this, but it sort of does. So what we're going to try and do is build a bit of a checklist over the few weeks about, what are the kinds of design factors that might support self-reflection. And we've talked a lot about that, and that provides evidence of learning. We're going to try and build those benchmarks today, and then next week we'll talk about these two, feedback and visual design, and then the last session we'll talk about the authenticity and currency of what it is that we're doing, which comes back up a little bit to your point, Ali, about moving perhaps away from what's kind of a correct or authentic information that we might provide. Art of writing instructions, we'll talk a bit about attributing resources that we might use from other people, and something we think is probably, we've talked about even when I was in the sector, about the whole process of usability resources and how we share them across the sector, so that if Paul comes up with Paul's stuff is going to be shared, but if Paul comes up with something else unfunded in part of his training and work with another group, how can that resource sort of flow into other people at his organization or region or across the whole sector, as models we kind of pull down and sort of use. So that's what we're going to try and get to today, is those first two, and we've got a Google document that we're going to build that in. At the moment it's pretty much empty, but I'll share it with you. We're going to add to this, but you feel free to add to it as well, and you'll see when you open it that there is in the chat that essentially we're going to build this checklist as we kind of go. We'll add stuff after each session once we've kind of gone through those benchmarks. So that's probably what we'll spend the rest of the time session doing. See, we haven't got long to do that now, Wilson, have we? But we've had a really good discussion. So I'll hand back over to you.
So we're going to have a quick look. I'm just going to bring it across and have a quick look at I suppose the first question is anybody having trouble accessing the link? So,
you can see people looking at it.
Oh, yeah.
I can access it, but I can't edit it because the email that I've used to register is not a Google email. So I'll need to give you my Google email. So can I request edit access? Is that?
Yeah, sure, do that. Yeah.
So, but it says here anyone, it's interesting, so anyone on the internet with the link can change. So you shouldn't have to actually log in.
Well, it just says request edit access. It doesn't allow me to edit.
Interesting, isn't it? It makes you do what you don't.
Oh, hang on. I'll change that to editor. Okay. I had it on viewer.
Okay.
So yeah, now you should be right. I can see someone's got a cursor there.
So yeah, that's me. So, but I might have given different rights. I've just refreshed it to see if that edit change makes a difference. Ah, there we go. The anonymous dolphins moving around.
So I've sent the request.
Nice.
So
worries.
you should see that.
Oh yeah, I got it, Lottie.
Okay, thank you.
So what we'd love you to do is, so if you need to add another line, so as we get ideas, we can populate them in here. And then if you want to add another line, you just need to, if we've populated them already, just need to right-hand click in one of the rows, right-hand click, and then you can insert rows above and below as well. Do we want to have a brainstorm now? If there's any in your mind, otherwise we'll come back.
Sorry, Alison, can you explain me this? How and on what we're gonna give input?
So if we're in terms of the instructional design, so some of the instructions, some of the resources that we would produce, what do we have to, if we're going to help somebody support self-reflection,
Right.
How might you present that to somebody in a way that's easy and effective for them to do that self-reflection?
Also, I'm wondering if we do the next activity, we might be able to come back to that. Yeah, because we're going to focus in on ourselves there.
So we'll put that link also into the, need to put it, remember to put it into the Edmodo. All right. Okay, so breakout rooms. Let me grab my little notes. There they are. So just remember in the breakout room, if you put your, open your chat, then the information I'm going to put in, or the information I'm going to describe on the screen, and they're put in into the chat will be there together. So when you think about, and it's some of the discussions we were trying to unpack before around how do you monitor your own learning? So what are you doing? Do you know, so you know, what do you do to know that you've learned something? And then how will you know what other things that you need to learn more about? Oops, I got the wrong thing there.
Is this as a trainer, or is this putting ourselves in the...
You as being the learner.
Okay.
You as being the learner. So I've put it in there. So Michael, do you want to build the breakout rooms? So yep, gorgeous.
Ready to go.
The breakout rooms. So go in there and yeah, beautiful. Found it easy.
Oh, good. So how long do you want to give them?
Maybe about four or 5 minutes to see how they go in terms of the brainstorming. I'm just wondering, what do we want? So this will then lead into what kind of tasks can you use to help your learners monitor their learning or reflect on their learning? And then do we want to adjust? Thank you, Michael. The concept of you monitoring your own learning and then being able to forward think about or project what kind of learning needs you've got. With that, with how you do that, do they help you then extend to the types of tasks that you do with your learners to help them reflect on your learning? Is there anything that works for you that you could use with your learners, or alternatively, what are some of the things that you're doing now? So I know, Lottie, you were describing to Ali just as we were closing up there the KWL model.
Yeah. So yeah, that kind of thing works for me as well. So I can see that my learning goals are aligning with what I'm, learning, whatever course I'm learning. I think checklists as well help for You know, I think whenever I've used checklists as a learner, you know, can I do this? Can I do that? I think that helps reflect on my own learning as well.
So I'll ask the checklist first, and then I'd like to see ask you about the KWL as well. So what do these checklists look like? Are they like to-do lists? Are they very random, or do you have a formal way of doing this?
It depends on, so sometimes courses that I've done have checklists. So in this, you know, course you have learned, you know, X, Y, and Z, and just checking those off. When I've used them in my class, it might be a specific thing that they can do. And I mentioned the bingo thing as well. We sometimes use that. So it might be a specific thing, like it might be attaching a file to an email, or it might be you know, that they can search for the opening hours of a chemist or something like that. So it's all very concrete tasks that show that they can, you know, they can use things in email, or they can use things in their, you know, using Google searches and things like that. So I find that they work quite well because they're quite concrete, and they can show the learners that even if they only remember part of it, that they sort of know, oh, okay, well, I know I searched for this and I have to look for something else. I think that's, yeah, and when I've used those in other courses, when, you know, I've been a learner and I've seen people use checklists, I think that's quite good. I've used learning surveys as well when my students have been online.
Fantastic. I like the idea that like almost like the course criteria, the course objectives actually becomes a physical resource to use for students to monitor their own learning.
Yeah.
And maybe something I should do, because I actually do that for my learners. So maybe that's something I need to learn to do a bit better. I keep a track of where they're at and what they've done.
Yes.
And so I need to revert that. So before I open up for the other people's discussions, the KWL model, what does that look like? Is there a visual tool that you have for that?
So it's basically a table, and so I give them sort of a template. So the table, it has know, want, learn at the top of each column, and then it'll have the session number. So it can be, you know, they put what they already know and want to know at the beginning of the session, and then I get them to add what have they learned bit at the end of the session, and then we can see, oh, have they, you know, met their learning goals? And if they haven't met their learning goals, then we might actually add that into the next session to make sure that they, you know, they learn what they want to learn. So, and I've used it in my computers for beginners class as well, and by the end of it, they're adding their own rows to the table. So it was quite a, you know, a handy tool. They can is teaching tool as well.
And that is, as I was mentioning very early on, is that helping learners learn how to learn is quite powerful. And so that sounds like a reasonably simple table process is actually really empowering. You know, it's giving them the okay. Paul was talking about, you know, that the learners felt they needed to have the okay. You've actually already taught them that it's okay. You get to manage some of what you're, you know, you get to make some decisions in the learning process as well.
Yeah, so they get to decide what they want to learn. And then obviously if it's something that's I'm not covering in my session plan, then I will add it to the plan, and it sort of helps to tailor it depending on what their goals, because as we said earlier, their goals might be they go on to further study, or their goals might be they just want to do it for, you know, their own learning, or they want to get a job or something like that. So their goals are quite often all different, and I find that when they say what they've learned is all different because they take different things away from the lesson. So
yeah, they're all individuals in terms of what they take away, because when they came with a purpose, and all their purposes were so different. So that's fantastic. Anybody else want to share what kind of tasks or tools you might use to help your students monitor or reflect? So I think we're talking about monitoring and forecasting. So what have we done? How are we tracking, and then where do we still need to go to? Bruce?
What I tend to do with my participants is very similar to what Lottie has done, but I do it more within the session, where I can give them something beforehand so that they can write down, or it's just to ensure that every single learner fully understands what they are learning and what has been taught, so that there is one form of consensus in the information that is being provided. So what example that I gave to Paul is that I might say 1 + 1 is 2. However, some learners might go, no, 1 + 1 isn't 2, 1 + 1 is window, or 1 + 1 is 11. I need to ensure that every single learner, and they reflect back and they write down what do they mean by, by their answer, or what I'm teaching. Do they thoroughly understand that 1 + 1 is actually 2, and why it is 2, the mechanism behind it, to why of what the information or what has been taught, because I don't want people to go back and go, oh, well, Bruce said 1 + 1 is window, and that's how I understood it. 1 + 1 is actually 2 in a mathematical form. That's the concept and the mechanism behind it. While if you're looking at a philosophical way, 1 + 1 could be window. So, but we're not teaching in that concept. We're teaching in that mathematical concept that 1 + 1 is 2 and not window or not 11 and so forth like that. Yeah.
So what does that look like? Is there something tangible that the students have, or is it a conversation?
Well, it can be a conversation, or it could be on the board or on the screen, because we are delivering online. So it could be and just explaining to the participants, this is 1, you +1, you count, is equal to 2. Not window, not it's not it's a mathematical formula, not a philosophical or any other way. So that they just ensure that participants completely understand what has been taught and why it is being taught.
So we're talking now digital. So I'm going to start write whiteboard and maybe an annotate. So you're asking your students to apply what they've learned.
Exactly. Apply. That's right.
And through that application, you get to monitor whether or not, because obviously you've seen them interpret it in 3 ways. The way that you're aiming them to understand 1 + 1 = 2. Some of them are interpreting it that it looks like a visual of something, and technically it can look like 11 if you're looking at the 2 ones.
Yeah, that's right. And I always use the another way is that just like the 5 kilometer radius, some people have interpreted it as a 5 kilometer distance instead of radius. So it's how they interpret it. We've got to make sure that they completely understand what information is being given and how it should be received.
And that can be done. Something just popped in my mind when you talked about that radius, because you know what, when I heard that, I thought it was a 5 kilometer. I didn't know it was a radius. I thought it was 5 kilometers distance. But sometimes what you can do is visualize that by, I'm just thinking there could be some good visuals around, unless I've misunderstood that, Bruce, is that, you can get some visuals and what's the right one and what's the wrong one, and then have conversations about, well, why is this the right one and why is this the wrong one?
That's correct.
It can help unpack and give that, that stuff that's behind it that Ali, you're talking about, that's actually hard to describe or to see because it has to be formalized in our head, and we can't see into learners' head. So we might show them a good way. This is the correct one, and this isn't the correct one. Why isn't it the correct one? And then them unpacking why it's not helps them understand why the correct one's that way. So Michael, actually, let me just give you this little one next, and then I'll hand it across to Michael. So informal learning, there's non-formal, informal, formal learning. There's a lot of informal learning happening there. And I think with the availability of the internet, there's a lot of self-learning going on. Do we monitor it and do we recognize it is another thing. The other thing around the available resources and people is that the concept of now that we have the internet and we are connected so strongly through the internet, it's not about what we know, because it's about knowing where to find it and who might have that information and how we might tap into others in terms of learning from each other. So Michael and I have been doing this project together and I've learned so much from him. So, the opportunities to work with each other. And then, how do we know when it's a learning moment? I'm still working on that with a couple of my children. Anyway, I'm going to hand across to Michael.
This is the next part of our benchmark, I suppose. So this is kind of really about, recognizing when your participants have made a step in their learning, and what kind of might this show? What sort of resources and activities do you use with your students that encourage them to reveal their learning, perhaps without having to turn anything in or complete anything or complete a worksheet or anything like that? Paul, before that, I just saw is that personal learning network? And yes, in relationship to yourself?
Yeah. I just keep on thinking about that ACE Ning that we had back in the day, Mick. Just about you remember the Ning that we had?
Oh yeah, gee, that's gone back a while.
Yeah. I just loved it because everybody was just so generous with their knowledge.
It was good.
And you would put up a question, and Ning, how do I describe a Ning? It's like an ancient Facebook, wasn't it?
Pretty nice, yeah.
But it was that thing where you could put a question into the Ning and you'd get a reply within half an hour. I just remember, and it's just that thing about finding people. It's not just a matter of finding people who know more about certain stuff than you do, but finding people who you trust, finding people who their ideas resonate with yours, perhaps their values as well, and you can share ideas. I've got a teacher whom I work with, and we call each other every day.
Yeah.
and have a yak, and it's just a great way to learn and to share ideas.
It's really interesting. So I went to some professional development. That's probably the best professional development I've ever seen, where they got 3 worldwide experts in a room around learning development in the kind of corporate area. And so they were really great at what they did. But so when they got in there, they gave a little 5-minute introduction as to what they did about the top. There wasn't a topic about their expertise. Then people come and sat in a chair and ask them a question about some learning hassle they had, facilitating, assessment, whatever that they wanted solved. And so some of the experts were okay at that, but there's one expert I remember, he's an international guy. I suddenly realized why he's an international expert, because he sat there for 30 seconds and then he just went bang and put down a total strategy that the person could particularly use, and then gave another one. And I remember thinking, wow, that's a really powerful kind of expertise that you have. And so, yeah, I guess your students, their personal learning network is one another, and you, and I guess their family too as well. We're getting a nice list here. I'm assuming you all know how to annotate.
And another reflective exercise that we have in Skills for Work and Study is the what, so what, now what. Are you familiar with that one?
No.
So the what is, what did you learn today? The so what is, why is this learning important to you? And the now what, it's kind of like a little bit of a challenge. Okay, you've learnt this stuff in the class today. How are you going to use that in your everyday life?
Oh,
So it's giving people strategies to actually use what they've learned.
a bit good brainstorm one. So that's a little bit like Lottie's, isn't it, in a sense? So what's the so what one?
So it's called what, so what, now what.
Yeah, so what was the so what one about? So what did you learn today? So what?
Is why is this learning important to you? And the now what, how are you going to use this learning?
I guess a bit like Lottie, and the more you do with students, the more they become kind of self-reflective. We're getting a good list here.
And it's like when when I teach the students, EAL students about vocab, I say that, and I just give them my opinion that what words that they might learn the meaning of a particular word, but if they don't use that word in their everyday conversation or in their writing, it's not part of their vocabulary. So it's just throwing that challenge out to them.
That's where some of that industry knowledge becomes a bit challenging too, doesn't it? Because you want to get into the industry, but you don't use those words every day. You have to be reminded what those concepts are. Hey, we're getting close to time. So this is a really fabulous list, Alison. Should we cut to the chase around what the task is for this week?
Yes, so we've built it up to, we've unraveled and unpacked, when we're talking about formal assessment and non-formal assessment, I think we're getting a much clearer picture about what this non-formal assessment is, and that it's quite fluid. It's not something that's one way of doing things. Sometimes it's things we're observing with students, and sometimes it's very explicit, which is that process, Paul, that you've just described about giving us a structure of it's not just me about being able to regurgitate something. I need to actually know how I'm going to use it somewhere that's going to be useful to me. And then when I've worked that out, then that's when the long-term memories actually happen. So between now and next week, through the Edmodo, is next week, I think. Anyway, between now and the next session, I know there's one time there's a fortnight, one time there's a week. So what we want you to do is either one of your existing resources, what are some of the existing resources that you're using, or find a resource that you're using, and then how might you strengthen that on some of the things that we've talked about when we're trying to make it a little bit more explicit around how to use learning, or how to acknowledge you've learned and then how to use that. How might you improve what you've currently got or other people have got? So it is next week.
Yep.
Michael, anything else you want to add to that?
I noticed that we'll add the PowerPoint slides and the recording and this task to Edmodo. So we'll be in touch with you when we put all that up.
Beautiful. Okay. So time. Let me know if there's any questions. I'll let Michael and I know if there's any questions. Otherwise, there we go. There's the date. Thank you so much. It was really, really a fantastic conversation around this monitoring our own learning and how do we do that, and how we might encourage our other colleagues, other educators, but in particular, the fantastic work you guys are already doing in this space, and then how might we build on that to improve the instructional and educational design. So Michael, do you switch the recording off and then